The humidity in the country club dining room felt like a physical weight, thick with the scent of oversteeped tea and the stagnant air of old money. I watched my father, Christopher, lean across the table. The gold on his wrist gleamed with a predatory light as he slid a heavy, cream-colored envelope toward my sister. Hannah. He didn't bother glancing my way. When a legacy is being built, the architect is rarely invited to the groundbreaking, only the financiers. $120,000, he announced, his tone as polished as a piece of obsidian. For your digital media headquarters, Hannah. It is time the world recognized the potential of your brand. Hannah gasped, clutching the paper as if it were a holy relic. My mother, Heather, reached out to cover Hannah's hand, her expression radiant with a maternal warmth I hadn't felt in over a decade. I sat perfectly still, my fingers interlaced, feeling the crushing silence of being the family's invisible guest. And the student loans for my botanical architecture degree? I asked. My voice remained level, a flat, professional observation. The $40,000 you promised to clear if I finished the program at the top of my cohort? Christopher finally shifted his gaze toward me, but there was no heat in it. Just a faint flicker of boredom. Elizabeth, be practical. He sighed, swirling his vintage red. You spend your life studying dirt and root systems. You are a financial ghost, someone with no tangible footprint in the world that matters. Why would I invest in a ghost when I have a star right here? He's right, darling, my mother added, her eyes never leaving her plate. You have always been so flighty. This is about building something that lasts. You don't build a legacy with apple trees. I didn't offer a defense. I didn't beg for the merit I had already earned. I simply rose from my chair, the wood legs whispering against the marble floor. I left my wine untouched, a vintage I had likely subsidized through the household management I did for free. I walked out of that club and into the freezing rain, letting the financial ghost finally vanish into the darkness. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I sat in my car for a long time, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the metal roof providing the only pulse in the silence. The club's valet stood under the awning, a flickering silhouette in the fog, waiting to see if I'd pull away. I stayed parked. I didn't even turn the key. Instead, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. My pulse was steady, clinical. In the glow of the screen, I felt like a surgeon prepping for a long overdue extraction. For years, I had functioned as the family's silent administrator. Because I was the capable one, I held the keys to their digital kingdom. I managed the cloud storage, the premium entertainment accounts, and the high-end health insurance policy that funded Hannah's cosmetic upkeep and my mother's private wellness retreats. I opened the insurance portal first. $120,000 for a headquarters. Yet they hadn't noticed the umbrella policy premium was due by midnight. I bypassed the payment. I simply unlinked my routing number, the account they treated like an infinite spring. Next was the digital infrastructure. Hannah's brand subscriptions, her editing suites, the high-speed fiber at the family estate, it was all registered to me. I had set it up years ago to bridge a gap during a lean month, and they had simply allowed me to continue footing the bill. I felt no rush of adrenaline as I terminated every active service. I felt no surge of petty joy. I felt a deep, cooling clarity. This wasn't a tantrum. It was the closing of a bankrupt account. My mother had labeled me a financial ghost. Well, ghosts don't provide services. I opened my contacts. Dad, Mom, Hannah. I didn't block them yet. I wanted the blue text bubbles to turn to green first. I accessed my cellular app and triggered a total number change. New area code. This was the healthcare of silence. People mistake no contact for a weapon, but as I sat in that dark lot, I realized it was a vital amputation. You don't keep a limb that has turned toxic just because you share the same marrow. You remove it so the heart can keep beating. I was finally protecting the only asset left that had value, my own peace. I watched the signal bars on my screen drop to zero as the network processed the shift. My past was gone. The financial ghost had just walked through the wall, and for the first time in 29 years, the air I breathed was entirely mine. I put the car in gear and drove toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the soil was honest and the trees grew without needing an audience. I sat in the stillness of my new reality, the mountain peaks rising like jagged teeth against the night sky. But my focus was elsewhere. It was drifting backward, auditing the years I spent as a silent partner in a family that had defaulted on every emotional obligation. I recalled 3 years ago, when their prestigious facade nearly cracked. Christopher had gambled on a commercial development that went south, and the family's mountain cabin, the setting for every curated Christmas photo, was 48 hours away from a tax lien. They remained oblivious. I was the one who intercepted the legal notices. I was the one who worked 3 extra freelance surveys, documenting soil compositions until my vision blurred, just to quietly pay the $11,000 in back taxes. I never mentioned it. I believed that family was a structural foundation. You shore up the beams in secret so the roof doesn't cave. But the wood was already hollowed out by termites. I thought about the winter Mom underwent surgery. It wasn't just a routine procedure. The recovery was a grueling 6-week ordeal that left her unable to walk. Hannah was in Ibiza, networking on a billionaire's yacht. Christopher was in London on urgent business. I was the one who handled the surgical drains. I was the one who managed the midnight tremors and the agonizing nausea. I spent 42 nights sleeping on a folding cot at the foot of her bed, only to have her wake up and complain that the scent of my hand sanitizer was too clinical. My empathy had been a luxury they had overdrawn for a lifetime. Every time I had opted for silence, every time I had absorbed a slight or covered a debt, I was merely confirming that my labor had a price tag of 0. I was looking at the ledger now, and the interest had become a debt I could no longer carry. This was the reality of the investment of presence. Society tells you that blood creates an unbreakable bond, but they are lying. Blood is just a biological coincidence. True family is an investment of time, attention, and showing up when the light is failing. I had invested every ounce of my spirit, and in return, I was categorized as a ghost. I looked at the photos on my device, the ones from Hannah's graduation, where I was the one behind the lens, invisible as always. I selected the entire directory. Delete. I stopped seeking permission to exist and started taking attendance. I audited the attendance of my own life. Hannah? No-show. Heather? Absent. Christopher? Never arrived. The ghost was done haunting their halls. I was ready to start breaking ground. The internet is a permanent record, and it has no room for nuance. 2 days after I disappeared, I sat in a small diner on the mountain pass, using their public Wi-Fi to survey the fallout. Hannah had uploaded a video. She was framed in soft lighting, her eyes precisely reddened for the camera. I am just devastated, she whispered to her followers. My own sister, someone I trusted, just walked away. No explanation. She even cut off the family's emergency infrastructure. My business is paralyzed, and my parents are in pieces. I suppose some people simply cannot bear to see others thrive. The comment section was a swarm of indignation. How heartless, one person typed. A total betrayal of family, another echoed. I watched it with a detached curiosity. They weren't reacting to me. They were reacting to a script. Hannah had always been a better actress than I was a daughter. I shut the laptop and stared out at the rolling blue fog of the mountains. I felt no urge to draft a response. I felt no need to clarify my history. My resentment had been replaced by a cold, structural efficiency. It was the internal energy I needed to drive another 50 miles into the high-altitude terrain, to a property that looked more like a graveyard than a grove. That was where I met Mrs. Gable. She was 70. Her skin as rugged as oak bark and her eyes capable of identifying a lie before it left the throat. She had been a disinherited daughter herself, once upon a time. When I arrived at her gate, she didn't ask for a resume. She looked at my palms. You have the hands of someone who has been clutching at dead wood, she said, her voice like grinding stone. If you want to stay here, you have to learn the art of the cut. You have to remove the branches that look healthy but are starving the core. The following months were a study in physical transformation. I lived in a glass-walled cabin that felt more like a research station than a home. My days began at 4 o'clock in the morning, the mountain air so sharp it felt like inhaling glass. I spent my hours in the deep mud, clearing the fermented rot of a decade's neglect. My tailored suits were replaced by heavy denim and boots reinforced with steel. There is a profound silence that comes with total physical exhaustion. Every blister on my palm was a receipt for a debt I was finally paying to my own future. Every rare heirloom sapling I put into the earth was a territorial marker, a declaration that I was no longer a financial ghost. I was becoming the architect of my own sovereign state. Hannah was posting about growth from her rented villa, but I was the one living in the dirt. I was buried, silent, and ignored, which is exactly where a seed needs to be before it finally breaks the surface. 2 years on the mountain had recalibrated my entire internal compass. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The rows of gray, dying wood had been replaced by a masterpiece of botanical architecture. I had mapped the orchard for more than just fruit. I had designed it for resilience, interweaving rare heirloom apples with wildflower corridors that buzzed with life. But the most significant discovery was hidden beneath the shale. While surveying the northern ridge for a gravity-fed irrigation line, I found a patch of soil that stayed warm even in the dead of January. We excavated, and the mountain revealed a gift. A high-altitude thermal spring, mineral-heavy and steaming in the cold air. I sat with Mrs. Gable as the certified appraiser walked the boundaries of the land. He reviewed my architectural plans, looked at the spring, and then looked at me with a profound, professional respect. $2,760,000, he said, his voice carrying in the thin air. And that is a conservative estimate. Between the rare species patents and the thermal rights, this isn't a farm, Elizabeth, it's a fortress. The weight of that figure didn't make me feel wealthy. It made me feel immovable. I was raised as a financial ghost. I told Mrs. Gable that night, watching the steam curl into the dark sky. My family saw me as a liability because I didn't make a sound they could monetize. They mistook my silence for lack of substance. This is the reality of the financial ghost syndrome. In toxic hierarchies, the scapegoat's contributions are erased so the golden child can claim the spotlight. They don't overlook your value because they are blind. They overlook it because admitting your worth would force them to see their own deficiency. They need you to be a ghost so they can keep your labor in the shadows. But the mountain had taught me a more honest form of mathematics. You cannot gaslight a blossoming tree. You cannot bully a harvest into existence. Reality is the only ledger that keeps an honest count. And for the first time in my life, my accounts were in perfect balance. I looked at my reflection in the glass cabin. The woman staring back didn't shrink when she was looked at. She wasn't waiting for an invitation to a country club table. She had built her own table from the very earth they thought would bury her. I was the architect now, and the foundation was made of solid rock. The mountains have a way of stripping away the fog, exposing the truth underneath. My friend Sarah, a forensic specialist who had stayed by me through the ghost years, called me just as the first frost began to settle on the heirloom branches. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of professional shock and personal anger. "I have finished the audit on your grandmother's trust. You need to prepare yourself." I didn't sit down. I stood by the glass, looking out at the fortress I had built. "Just the data, Sarah. Give me the facts. The signature on the withdrawal form from 6 years ago? The one that emptied the $40,000 designated for your education? It's a forgery. A clumsy one. The digital logs show the request originated from your father's office IP address. Christopher didn't just neglect to pay your loans, Elizabeth. He embezzled the seed money your grandmother left for you to fund Hannah's debutante ball and her first influencer trip to the Maldives. I felt a coldness settle in my bones that had nothing to do with the winter air. This was the criminal twist. This wasn't just a story of bias or neglect. This was a theft of my future to decorate someone else's present. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The villa Hannah bought with that house gift? It was constructed on uncompacted sand. Recent landslides have triggered a massive structural failure. The foundation is cracked, and the insurance provider is denying the claim because the developer was a shell company linked to one of your father's associates. They are losing it all. Elizabeth, their entire lifestyle is sinking. I looked at the appraisal on my desk, the one for $2,760,000. The financial ghost was now the only one standing on solid ground. My father's forged signature was the lethal evidence I never asked for, but would certainly use. This was the moment their path to redemption vanished. You can forgive a lack of affection, but you cannot forgive a theft presented as a blessing. I felt no need to scream. I felt no need to call them in a rage. I simply felt the weight of the evidence. I was no longer a character in their story. I was the lead investigator of their collapse. I picked up my pen and signed the formal demand for trust reclamation. My signature was bold, clear, and unlike my father's, completely authentic. The mountain winter was finally giving way to the first buds of spring, but the air at the perimeter was still sharp. I stood behind the reinforced glass of my welcome center, watching a black SUV navigate the winding access road. It pulled up to the heavy steel gate, the gate that didn't open without an appointment. I stepped out, the wind pulling at my hair. On the other side of the bars stood Christopher, Heather, and Hannah. They looked like visitors from a different planet. Their designer coats were too thin for the altitude, and their shoes were ruined by the mud. "Elizabeth!" Heather cried, her voice trying to find a maternal frequency she hadn't tuned into in years. "Honey, thank God. This place, it's magnificent. We always knew you had this potential." Christopher stepped forward, resting a hand on the gate. He tried to summon his country club smile, but it looked like a structural failure. "It's a masterwork, Elizabeth. Truly. We're so proud. Look, things have been unstable back home. Hannah's house, the legalities. We need a place to reorganize. A secure location. Family stands together in a storm, right?" I looked at him. I didn't see a father. I saw a man who had stolen my name to buy his favorite child a life that was currently sliding into the sea. "You called me a financial ghost," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the valley. "You told me I play in the dirt. You told me I was unserious. Why would you seek refuge with a ghost?" "Elizabeth, don't be dramatic," Hannah snapped, her influencer mask cracking. "We're cold, and we're tired. Just open the gate." I reached into the pocket of my canvas coat and pulled out a manila envelope. I didn't touch the gate. I slid the envelope through the bars. "That is the forensic audit of Grandma's trust," I said. "And a formal demand for the $40,000, plus 6 years of compounded interest. I have already filed the paperwork regarding the forgery. I'm not pursuing criminal charges today, Christopher. But if you ever step foot on this mountain again, or if Hannah ever mentions my name online, I will release that police report." Christopher's face went the color of ash. The envelope shook in his hand. "You had 29 years to be a family," I said, stepping back from the steel. "You used them poorly. Access to my life is a privilege earned by respect, not a right granted by biology, and as of right now, your subscription has been terminated." I turned away. I heard Hannah begin to shout, and my mother start to weep, but I didn't break my stride. I walked back into my grove, past the trees that were finally ready to bloom, toward the spring that would fund the scholarship I was naming after the grandmother they had betrayed. That night, for the first time in my life, I slept through until morning. No guilt, no static, just the sound of the mountain breathing, and the quiet, solid knowledge that the harvest was finally mine.